Welcome back, Barons. My name is Carlos Cartledge. I am the podcast manager for The Crusader, and on this episode, staff members Kendall Johnson and Isabella Garcia converse with Associate Professor Ibrahim Al-Marashi and Professor Peter Herman about their thoughts and words on the Israeli and Hamas situation.
Just to introduce everyone. I'm Isabella Garcia. I'm a junior and I'm the editor at large for the Bonita Vista High School Crusader, which is our student-run newspaper publication.
Yeah. Kendall Johnson. I'm a senior at Bonita, and I'm our features or CPS editor. Our CPS would be our center page spread. We cover a hard-hitting topic, in relation to the world or school. Yeah.
And then just to review, today we are here with today we're here with Associate Professor Ibrahim Al-Marashi, who teaches Middle Eastern history at Cal State University of San Marcos, as well as Professor Peter Herman, who teaches English literature at SDSU and also sits on SDSU's Presidential Task Force on addressing anti-Semitism.
Feel free to correct any of that. Does that
sound... No, it's fine. It's okay. Great. Perfect.
So today we'll be discussing the topic of the Israel-Hamas war, specifically in regards to how news and media outlets have been portraying the war, how students can become educated on this really ever-present topic, and how student-run publications like ourselves can handle this topic during such sensitive times. So I guess what we first want to ask you guys, do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So first question is on your credentials specifically. So how did you guys get into becoming professors?
How did we become professors?
Yeah. Whoever wants to get started,
and
why you chose what you teach, anything like that, just to have some background on you guys, who you guys are.
Professor Al-Marashi, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. For all intents and purposes, the easiest answer I could give you is it's on one side, my father bombarding me with history and my mother denying me the history of Iraq, because the Iraq she escaped from was, or left, I should say, was the Iraq of Saddam Hussein, which was a police state. It was brutal. And she did not want to remember any of that trauma. And so it was kind of on one level growing up with history, and then on the other level having it denied to me made me only more curious, so that I ended up becoming a historian of Iraq, specifically the security, the police forces that were the equivalent in the secret police that was monitoring her family and forced her to flee, became my specialty. So that's, and then I started my undergrad at UC San Diego, and I hate to say this, there were some professors who I thought I could do a better job. And that's why I wanted to become a better professor. Sitting in the audience, I thought, you know what, I can breathe some life into this subject that they're not doing.
So, Professor Herman, would you like to kind of give your story?
Well, my story is so much more uninteresting compared to this. So my story, I suppose, is I have been in love with literature, since grade school, if not before that. I'd always wanted to be a teacher. And first when I was in high school, I wanted to be a high school teacher. And then I got to college and went, I think I can do a little bit more than that. Mm-hmm. For me, I unlike Professor Al-Marashi, I had the most wonderful professors. I had people who were, I could never be as good as some of the people I had as undergrad. Now, I will admit that there's a reason why I went for the Renaissance and not, say, the 18th century, because the 18th century prof I had when I was an undergrad, as I said, you've heard the phrase to make mountains out of molehills. Well, this guy made molehills out of mountains. He reduced everything to insignificance. It was unbelievable. So I stayed far, far away from that. And I just had great people all around. But, for me, what really interests me is how literature interacts with history. What was going on at the time? how are these authors reflecting it? How are they then intervening, if you can use that phrase, in history? So all the way through my career, the question that I always ask is, what was going on at the time? Yeah.
So I guess coming off of that, as educators, and how is like this war kind of reflected in your teachings as of like late, and like how have you guys handled that with, has it been brought up in your classrooms? I mean, if whoever wants to like just go for it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It haunts the classroom, and not in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With one of my classes last semester, I constantly, when I'm doing Renaissance literature or any other kind of reference, I'm constantly trying to connect what's going on in the classroom, what we're talking about, with contemporary references, contemporary culture, insofar as somebody who is 65 years old knows anything about contemporary culture.
Mm-hmm.
We try, cut us some slack here. So any event, I would forget the precise detail, but I thought of an analogy for what we were doing in class with the Gaza war. But knowing the sensitivities of the class, I asked their permission to make the analogy. They said no. Don't. So I didn't. Then after the class, I asked a student, why?
Mm-hmm.
And the student said, it's because the class is so divided that making an analogy in this, of any sort, raising it, would divide the class. It would ruin the class atmosphere.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So, I did it.
Yeah. And Professor Al-Marashi, have you had any similar experiences or anything you'd like to share of how this topic has kind of infiltrated in your classroom?
Well, I should add the caveat. While I teach San Marcos, I also teach for free at a university in Ukraine. Since the war began, and I've taught in Ukraine since 2016. I've been teaching history
Wow.
there. Um, so, and I also teach at a university in Spain. So I teach to
You get
three
around.
very different demographics. Zoom, it's the Zoom revolution that could allow me to now have such a geographical reach. Cal State San Marcos has a very different demographic. So what Peter is talking about, I wish, uh, and I'll just tell you a long story. I wish and I've tried for the ages to get students interested in the Holocaust, interested in the Middle East. I've met a lot of apathy, and I'll talk about this a bit differently. I'll talk about this a bit later because I've seen some of the questions you brought up.
Yeah.
So let me just say very easily, I wish this could be an issue that my Cal State San Marcos students are animated about. It's just the demographic is quite different. We don't have large Jewish population, maybe in a classroom, maybe one student out of 30, I could say. And not many Middle Eastern students as well. Maybe again, one out of 30 in the same room. So let me just put it in terms of for a university classroom in Spain, you do have a large number of students who are from South America, originally of Jewish heritage, where they left, Poland, Central Europe prior or during World War II. So the subject is very raw for those students from South America, particularly from Argentina, which has a large Jewish population, who come to study in Spain. So that subject is very raw for them. But it's also quite surprising how, in a European setting, how students who aren't necessarily from the Middle East, that this issue really galvanizes them. So in that particular case, it's not just Middle Eastern students. This is a global issue that tends to be very divisive. Now, in the Spanish context, I was teaching a class on the history of world history from antiquity to 1945. That's the way they divide it. And ironically, I began a class on the Levant, on the Eastern Mediterranean in antiquity. And even that class, I could show how that sets up the conflict in the future. And even that subject proved to be very divisive. So I know the divisiveness there because you have both sides. Ukraine, on the other hand, to my surprise, and this goes, a lot of Ukrainians around October 7th felt empathy with Israelis and an inability to, it changed. Now you have to remember, this is around October 7th. A good number of the Ukrainians saw themselves in the eyes of the Israeli victims.
Uh-huh.
And then as the conflict ensued, some could be empathetic with the Palestinians, but you also have to remember now current geopolitics. And this is very much what Peter's talking about, is how our present interprets the lens of the past. Because Iran is considered a supporter of Hamas, and because Iran is providing drones to Russia that is bombarding Ukraine, immediately you could see how Ukrainian students immediately took a stand that was sympathetic towards Israel. And that was the hardest audience to reach, where I was more or less trying to say, try to see this conflict. Now, of course, I'm sympathetic to the Ukrainian situation. I teach for them. I teach for free, literally for free. But I couldn't get them to see the conflict, and for good reason. I mean, they've endured now more than, they're living in a war zone. But that was the hardest classroom because it really, when you're enduring a conflict like this, is very hard for you to see both sides of the conflict, empathize with both sides.
And so going into like our next question, like for the Israeli-Hamas war, since it has been, like you said, particularly difficult to like represent this situation, since they're both like two indigenous peoples warring for ancestral land to which both like they both have arguably legitimate claims. First, my first thing I wanted to say was, do you like agree with the statement on like how the two have both legitimate claims?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you're going to talk to anybody who is sane, there is no doubt that Jews have an ancestral claim. I mean, my standard joke is that they get at the end of the Passover service, we've been saying for hundreds of thousands of years, next year in Jerusalem. We do not say next year in New Jersey. It's Jerusalem. And there's a long set of reasons for that. Israel, Jews, were in this area. Then the Romans came. I mean, there were a whole bunch of empires before that. Then the Romans came, and then you had the rebellion, and then they were dispersed. That's called the diaspora. But there's no doubt that that is the ancestral homeland. At the same time, there are other peoples who live and have a long-standing claim to this.
Yeah.
The present conflict, which obviously goes back 1948 and before, the present conflict, certainly with Hamas does not agree with that statement. Hamas has made absolutely clear that their intention is to wipe Israel off the map. And they deny that Jews have any indigenous claim to this territory. There have been attempt after attempt after attempt to create a two-state solution. The first one actually was in 1948, the UN. The Jews accepted the two-state solution in 1948. The Arab states did not. And so immediately they invaded. And that has been the story ever since. Unless and until Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the others, unless and until they accept Israel's existence and forswear violence, this is not going to ever end. Professor Al-Marashi will now say the precise opposite.
I will say the precise opposite, but looking at different units of analysis. So, in other words, do both sides have an ancestral claim to this land? Absolutely. And then now I'm going to turn it on its head and say, but I would also say Iraqi Jews had an ancestral claim to Iraq, and that in theory had been in Iraq before even the Arab tribes came there.
Yes.
So now I take this to a different direction. If I say that, I remember a podcast given by a great historian, Yuval Noah Harari, who said that it's often forgotten in this that Iraqi Jews were denied of their home after the creation of Israel. And I would say I would agree. And that is also a trauma in that what was denied to me as somebody who came from Iraq was the ability to form Iraqi Jewish friends. That it was a future and an opportunity denied to me. Okay. So if I say it that way, then what am I trying to say is that the tragedy here is on one level, the way the British went about dealing with statecraft after World War II. And I'm watching now to kind of situate what's happened here. Partition is the real villain here. In other words, both sides can have a claim to the land. But if I give you a story of a divided Ireland, a divided Cyprus, a divided Palestine mandate, and then the way they handled South Asia and the partition of Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Do you see how I create a narrative of the victims of imperialism? Okay. And then in that case, then I could say both Palestinians and Israelis and Jews. Okay. I'm kind of reshifting the narrative that both can have ancestral claims to a land. The way those ancestral claims were managed were faulty. And that the British, more or less, after World War II, kind of tried to wash their hands, and I'm using a deliberate metaphor from Pontius Pilate, to wash their hands of the affair. And we've seen the last time that happened.
Goodbye. We are
Goodbye.
finished with you people.
Goodbye. Exactly. And let's let you fight it out, whether it's in this South Asia, whether it would be future Cyprus. So do you see what I'm saying was that this is kind of giving you a foreshadowing of what I'm going to be talking about in the future is, when we look at this conflict, we tend to focus on two peoples, Israelis and Palestinians, whereas I would say let's look at past trajectories, imperialism. And then particularly after October 7th, you can see the easy default scenario is to take a side based on identity. But I would say let's take a side based on generational differences. And in this case, I could easily blame the generation of leaders on both sides, whether it's the Netanyahu government or the Palestinian leadership for the current crisis. So, I mean, do you see what I'm doing here? Is to kind of shift the units of analysis. Now, are you going to ask the next question about what media can you go to?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, okay, so I'll wait to
What
answer that
media
one.
should
And
we go to?
that's my 2 cents as a historian
Honey, you
and
should
as
have.
somebody connected to the region.
I guess, I mean, thank you guys a lot, but so objectivity kind of feels really impossible in this whole scenario. There's a lot of passions on both sides. Everything's very emotional, which makes sense. So this is a very big question, but how does media coverage of the war lead or contribute towards these feelings of marginalization or fear in society, locally, nationally, globally? How do you think?
I think that you need to broaden this slightly. It's not so much, how do you say, the media.
Mm-hmm.
It's the world of the web.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ask me, my first response is going to be, don't take news from TikTok. Don't get your news from Instagram.
Yeah.
That is a real problem.
Yeah.
My guess is that you guys have abandoned Twitter, otherwise known as X, and I would say the same thing.
Yeah.
That is really, really dangerous. Unfortunately, I grew up at a time when if it appeared in the New York Times, the assumption was it was true. And the fact is also they do great reporting. They really do. But they too have fallen. And there are many instances now of reports from the New York Times. The BBC seems to be a regular offender where they will just, take the propaganda from one side and just run with it. And it's only much later that they go back and have corrections. So, in another time, 20, 30 years ago, I would have said, go to the, what's it called? Heirloom? No, that's not the right word. Go to the trusted media sources.
Yeah.
New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe CNN, ABC's, but that's really no longer possible today. You're going to have to do an awful lot of your homework yourself. Now, that is possible. I mean, there's more than enough information, so, sources out there where you can understand what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, my one piece of advice is don't parrot something that you don't fully understand. For example, there are now many examples of high school kids and college kids, yelling from the river to the sea. And then you ask them, which river, which sea? And the answer is, I don't really know. Mwah, 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 So, again, I wish I could tell you, go to the New York Times, there you will find the truth. But unfortunately, I can't.
Yeah. Recently I did see that there was a study involving like students and seeing what media outlets that they were looking to and how they were getting their information. And they even did their own study of like using platforms like TikTok and Instagram and separating using 3 different devices and seeing what media they were getting generated by searching in like certain
different things.
like the algorithm was changing it.
Yeah. I think the algorithm is definitely a big contributor to the kind of media we're consuming. I feel like because we are in our newspaper, we, in some sense, know a little bit better about what to look for and how to, look for reliable sources. But a lot of students don't know that. And I don't know if it's just the time that we're living in. It's really difficult to know if what you're consuming is true or not. But I think just like going into that, what suggestions do you guys have for just media outlets and representation when both these people, a lot of people believe, just deserve our sympathy? How do you think media should handle this? If you want to begin.
I don't want to. I am last time. Professor Al-Marashi should speak.
Well, no, I agree absolutely with Peter. So basically, my only recommendation then would be consume media, not only parrot, but consume media that makes you feel uncomfortable. So what I've done was, on one level, try to stop using social media after October 7th. I've deliberately stopped it. But every now and then I will tune in with some accounts that will have, I know, absolutely divergent viewpoints. And it's just surprising to witness the two, so-called bubbles of reality. And this is what I'll just describe it. They are two different bubbles of reality. So my only recommendation is, yes, to do that, just to be aware that, instead of Plato's caves, that there are two very different caves. Okay, if I could use that metaphor, instead of a single cave. And then what do you do in terms of finding, let's say, reliable information?
Yeah.
Is there such a thing? Is no, it's just to go with all the information you consume with a critical mind, and that's it. There is no such thing as an unbiased media or a reliable media. Every viewpoint is going to have some kind of filter. Just acknowledge that, and more or less, of course, there are. Uh, Let me put it this way. Are there any media that exist where both sides can agree? That's the challenge. And so here's the answer I would want to give is there is a cartoon. It's an animated cartoon created about more than 10 years ago by Nina Paley. It's called This Land Is Mine. Okay. This Land Is Mine is created. She's a woman of Jewish heritage based in New York. And what she did was she took the soundtrack of a film in the 1960s called Exit, starring
Paul Newman.
Paul Newman, and kind of turned it on its head. Instead of 3 hours, she made it 3 minutes. And more or less throughout time, she said, who else could have said this land is mine? So it goes back to that question you asked earlier. Now, it's an animated cartoon, and what I've done was try to show it, and I've been kind of quite nervous whenever I show it. I show it to Arab Middle Eastern audiences as well as Israeli Jewish American audiences. And to my surprise, the audiences in both venues clap at the end, which kind of gives me a realization is what media can you reliably consume? Like I said, there is no such thing. But if you can find something where both sides say, you know what, this person has a point.
My,
And keep in mind, Nina created it 10 years prior to 2023.
my guess is that both sides are clapping for opposing reasons. Because the only, I mean, there was a great movie done in early 1960s, The Battle of Algiers.
Mm. Ponte Cordoba's film, yes. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
It's an astonishing film. You guys really should look at it because it's the only film where it was shown for training purposes by both CIA and by terrorists. Yeah. So I think I would still urge you guys there are two things. One, stay with recognized media. Somebody's blog post or somebody's Twitter or Instagram or TikTok account, I would be very, very careful with accepting because quite literally there's no filter there.
Yeah.
I mean, if I want to, I can go on to Twitter and say, or Instagram or TikTok and say anything I want to. I can say whatever lies I want to. So I'd be very, very careful with that. When you're still dealing with legacy media, that was the phrase I had in mind. Legacy media, then, there are still editors. There are still standards. Reporting has to be confirmed. If someone says something, you need 2 or 3 sources to confirm something. Now, doesn't mean that they haven't made serious error in the past, but it's still the likelihood of the Times, the Post, the Wall Street Journal, and those being accurate is much greater than the average idiot who is posting things to TikTok and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the larger problem, however, is that we now live in a post-truth society. Any assertion can be dismissed as fake news or alternative facts. As I do not know how we get out of this. I mean, there is now endless documented evidence of Hamas raping Israeli women. There is endless evidence of tunnels in Gaza underneath hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, instead of people saying, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong, or yes, this happened, it's just rejected out of hand. Oh, these are lies. This is a deep fake. And I do not know how we get out from under that. I mean, the other example of that is, of course, how apparently 50% of Americans today believe that Joe Biden stole the election, even though there is no evidence against it. And whatever evidence you come up with saying, no, no court has accepted this, there is no evidence, it's just dismissed. That's not true. It's fake news. And I don't know how you get out from under that.
Yeah, it's kind of like going into
Now, I know you two are actually involved with your campus paper.
Yeah.
So I have to say to you as media professionals or aspiring media professionals, also in terms of the legacy media, I would highly recommend a website called Ground News that basically says, you know, read the legacy media, but also see how they fall in how does the political spectrum filter the news and the way it's presented. And I think that in and of itself can be a second learning experience. In other words, you're not only getting the information from, let's say, the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post, but you're also cognizant of the various filters, whether it's corporate filters, partisan filters, that affects the way the news is being presented to you. So Battle of Algiers, I'll just get to that. That is fast. Just to tell you, on the eve of the 2003 Iraq War, it was shown at the Department of Defense. So there you go. The Battle of Algiers was used to manage the occupation of Iraq, and the Iraqi insurgents would also watch it for inspiration. So there's that. But with that short animated clip, again, if I could defend, just to say what happened with that at the end, no spoilers. Nina's argument was the only one who could claim the Holy Land, the Levant, Israel, Palestine, was the angel of death. And I think that's why audiences were clapping, because there she was trying to make something that both sides could agree on. A lot of blood has been shed for this land. So you're absolutely right. There are some media people claim, they clap for because they see a functional instrumental value to it. And then there is some media that can make us realize our shared humanity at the same time.
I think we also need to remember, and I'm sure you would agree with this, that while as you say, objectivity is impossible. I mean, you're always interpreting the world through various lenses of one sort or another. But at the same time, there are objective facts, and those facts cannot be denied. And that's where you get into people who will say, they will deny the reality of the Holocaust, and they will deny that, the moon landing happened and the like. So, I mean, I don't want to suggest that we are awash in a sea of relativity and it's impossible really to navigate. I mean, there are facts. There are, which we have to agree on. There is sometimes, a right and a wrong.
it all seems to be very like combined together in a way that it makes it harder in a sense to prove like, hey, this news outlet, this is what I'm getting from them, this is what I'm getting from these
Yeah.
people. It's sort of
Yeah, especially I feel like in
Yes.
America, very
I was
there's
going to say harder doesn't mean impossible, and
yeah.
harder doesn't get you off the hook. I mean, as journalists, think about how, investigative journalists and what they do to uncover corruption
Yeah.
one place or another. I mean, these are facts, and the facts can be uncovered, and then what people do with them, well, that's probably a different story.
Yeah. So I guess I want to ask now, because we're talking about journalists and media and how we kind of can handle this situation, and it's all very difficult to like process, I guess. But how do you think a student-run publication like us can tell stories of these like vulnerable communities, these vulnerable people who have experienced these atrocities? How can we tell these stories in an effort to prevent like marginalization and fear
Yeah.
without causing any of that kind of stuff in our community? How can we tell these stories in equal parts? How can we do that, and what do you recommend as professors?
Tell the truth.
Yeah.
Just
That's it. And I agree. That's where we're going to have agreement.
yeah, tell the truth,
Yeah.
and let the chips fall where they may. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't say it anymore.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Especially because we remember there was a time, there was a pre-truth, like there's, this phrase post-truth. We can remember a time that preceded it. It's not a pre-truth era. There was a truth era. So it's kind of bewildering that that we've witnessed this transformation in our lifetime.
Yeah, I cannot begin to tell you how weird it is.
Mm.
That there is no evidence whatsoever, and tremendous amounts of evidence to the contrary, that Biden did not steal the election. He won it fair and square, and yet no matter how much evidence you come up with to prove the opposite, it doesn't seem to matter. And that is really a difficult situation. I mean, I suppose another point to keep in mind is always remember that you could be wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if there is contrary evidence to the position that you hold, maybe you have to change your mind. I mean, it's a hard thing because everyone likes to think, oh, I'm right. Of course I'm right. No one likes to admit that they are wrong, but that is an essential part of being a sentient human being, I think.
And so finally, like, since this war has brought like much discord to college campuses as well, since you guys both like
Oh yeah.
yeah um including like the resignation of two presidents from Ivy League universities and the president of the
Oh
top
yeah.
university in our region, UCSD. uh they sent out a notice proposing 4 million to develop a viewpoint neutral educational programs and training of faculty in the Middle East. The statement itself has attracted like a lot of controversy among like faculty. I've heard. So like, what is your like response to that? Would you say?
I think Abraham and I would both say viewpoint neutrality is impossible, and it's not even desirable. I mean, we're always driven by how about how we live in the world, what we want to say, what we want to do. To claim that we're going to just be neutral is ridiculous. I mean, we're always pushing a particular viewpoint or another. The difference is I wouldn't want viewpoint neutrality. What I want are facts. I want I want views that are backed up. I want views that are not obviously, objectively wrong.
Mhm.
And that, I mean, so claiming, I mean, I wish I could get some of this money, for this. But I think it's misguided and is quite frankly doomed to failure. But I also want to just slightly expand on what happened to those two university presidents.
Mhm.
They acted like morons. I'm really serious. I mean, they did not, their responses at that hearing to what Stefanik was saying were ridiculous. I mean, when somebody says to you, is calling for the genocide of Jews, would that be, against the university's regulations? Claiming it's it needs to be seen in context. And then what McGill did, which is I still think what sunk her, was leaning into the mic and grinning and saying with a voice dripping with condescension, it depends on the context. And then what happened with Claudine Gay? Claudine Gay could probably have survived that, except
Yeah.
she's a plagiarist, the real deal plagiarist. And after that, it was only a matter of time before Harvard finally said goodbye.
Um,
Of course, at the same time, now she's being offered multiple $1 million for a memoir. So I guess she's going to be okay.
Professor Al-Marashi, what's your take on this?
No, viewpoint neutrality, I would agree. Why would you want to go to a university to have neutral viewpoints? It defeats the purpose.
Boring.
Number one, and then remember how I answered. I mean, I get the gist of what is being requested, but when I answered critiquing British imperialism, that's not a neutral viewpoint. Or when I critique the leadership of Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority as both being kind of old, corrupt politicians, that's not neutral either. It's impossible to it's not only impossible, again, why would you enroll at a university?
Well, actually,
Exactly.
you might want it because it might create professors like you, since you will respond to it by saying, this is boring. I can do better than that.
Exactly. So I mean, no, I think the point is, does a professor shut down? I mean, viewpoint neutrality not only impossible, the whole idea is you should be, in homage to Socrates, you should be, even for the sake of debate, is that you hope the professors not only, would have a viewpoint, but then would allow a multiplicity of viewpoints being expressed by the students. That's what the university is for.
And
And I should also add to that there are unfortunately multiple examples of professors squishing, viewpoints that they don't like, and they being squished. I mean, cancel culture is a very real thing. So, I mean, exactly, there needs to be, viewpoint diversity. There needs to be intellectual diversity. Otherwise, well, why bother? I mean, if you just want a sort of a basic list of facts on, what the wheat product of the Ukraine is. It's like, well, that's not very.
And so how do you think how do we assure kind of students feeling safe in these environments, these schools, and
yeah,
when there's these, but also giving them the opportunity to express their viewpoints. I mean, they're going there to be educated, and they have a right to kind of, protest things or speak their viewpoints. But how do we assure that everything stays, we maintain a safe environment? And I don't know, I know that's a big question, but like, how would you guys, as educators, think that you guys could manage that on a campus?
I'm not sure how I can manage it on a campus. I can tell you what I would do in a classroom.
Okay. Yeah.
And first of all, hearing a point of view that you disagree with is not going to harm you. So get over that immediately. That's just nonsense. And it's unfortunately because it's something you hear an awful lot of, that, if I hear a view or a word or whatever, that I am harmed. Get over that immediately. Number two would be no violence. No violence at all. And that includes the heckler's veto. So when someone is saying something you don't like, you don't shout them down.
Yeah.
You have to insist on civility.
Yeah.
You can learn how to disagree without being disagreeable.
Agreed. And same. So for the university level in my classroom. So when I talked about, so I, like I said, I don't have much division at San Marcos, but the university classroom in Madrid, which was very divided. The only thing I could say for students who would have been affected on both sides was that consider me a safe space, so to speak, where not only can you articulate your opinions, but keep in mind a good number. I'll just say one example of an Argentinian student of Sephardic Jewish heritage just kept quiet. She was scared to articulate her opinion. So the only thing I could have offered her was just to say, don't look at me in terms of my background. Look at me as just a sympathetic professor who feel comfortable to articulate your concerns. And if you want your opinions to me. Uh, so, I've seen some professors have kind of in their signature, saying, my office is an LGBTQI safe space. I mean, I wonder what could be created where a similar kind of safe space is offered in this regard, kind of a human security safe space. Uh, these are just things I'm thinking of. I don't have the answers. This is all I can say. It's based on my past personal experience, what I've tried to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually what I think President de la Torre tried to do after 10/7, or shortly after 10/7. She sent out an email, a message to the whole campus community expressing, her horror at what happened on 10/7, recognizing that there has been obviously significant loss of life. As you said, the only winner here seems to be the angel of death. And as a result of that, just recently, a complaint was registered with the Department of Education accusing her of Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Because she was sympathetic, because she included sympathy towards the Israelis.
Yeah.
Along the same lines, or following that, recently there was a video of two women actually ripping down a poster of captured Israeli children, kidnapped Israeli children. And in this video, this woman walks up to the pillar with a grins, flashes a peace sign, and rips it off. Well, me and a couple of other people tried to get the Senate to condemn this, the University Senate to condemn this act. I mean, it's just horrible. I mean, how little empathy can you possibly have that you would tear down a poster of kidnapped children? I mean, it just boggles the mind. And the University Senate refused to do that. They refused. So they passed a resolution that condemned anti-Semitism in the abstract, but not the concrete example of it. So while I take what Professor Al-Marashi says, and I certainly agree with it, that's not what's happening on college campuses. And that is not good.
Anything you want to say, Professor Al-Marashi?
So I mean, I think going into the future, if you've noticed kind of the theme I've been trying to communicate is how do we teach empathy for both sides? And that is a tragedy that we have been polarized into two sides. I've spent my lifetime being passionate as a historian. And when I'm saying passionate is in my world history survey courses, trying to just communicate the horror of the Holocaust, as well as to kind of communicate human suffering in the Middle East as well. And this is kind of the tragedy that somebody can, that people need to understand that you can be passionate for human suffering without taking a side. And I think this is the problem, is that we're, the fact that I have to say both sides is a tragic outcome of the events after 10/7. That kind of the one message I've been trying to hone is, can we look at other agents that have caused human suffering, focus on those, and then kind of come across with an appreciation of suffering in terms of humanity? And that's kind of what I would regret, is that there's also haven't been spaces to articulate this at the same time, this message.
And I know, like, for us as a publication, we, like, when trying to get both sides of this, like, conflict, we did an opinion piece on it. We also did a news coverage on what our principal had to say, and then we also did an editorial cartoon about it. So I think just like having that diversity of coverages on, like, not only both sides but also, like, just in general, like, this is what's happening, has, like, is our way of trying to help show students on our campus, hey, and educate them, hey, this is what's going on. Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I saw that cartoon. I saw the cartoon. I mean, everything I've been saying has been in response to the cartoon. You came to us as a result of the cartoon. Now, keep in mind, I've spent a lifetime dealing with cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. And, as a Muslim, saying, cartoons will not kill us, you see. That's, as a Muslim, they're offensive. But we also have to learn that there have been cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad in a negative manner since the Divine Comedy. Dante and the illustrated versions of that have been depicting Muhammad in a negative context. We never raised an issue because Muslims then knew cartoons wouldn't kill us. So then the question I have to ask is, who raised awareness of these cartoons? What did they try to achieve? What kind of polarization was attempted as a result of this? And so, that's how I would answer the cartoon controversy that you had, is that cartoons don't kill. But the mentality that says cartoons have to be banned or posters have to be taken down, those are mentalities that are dangerous and that in some extreme cases can kill.
And then
Yeah, I was actually, I'm sorry, I was trying to find the cartoon. While it's certainly true that, political cartoons have extremely wide latitude. And as you pointed out, the whole point of these things is to exaggerate and, yes, to insult. Think of the political cartoons, I suppose, of Richard Nixon, with the nose, or Lyndon Baines Johnson with the great big ears and the like. At the same time, that particular cartoon was so filled with objectively wrong claims that while, yes, there is a fine line and between the allowable and the objectionable, that particular cartoon went over the line. And that particular cartoon went over the line into anti-Semitism. It's sometimes, I grant you, it is hard to determine when that happens. It's always arguable, but that one went over the line.
I guess that
If you
that
quickly
leads,
send it to me, I can describe it. Why?
I guess that leads me to ask, I mean, it was, in our opinion section, and it was a student I mean, we saw it, they depicted their opinion, and obviously not everyone in the paper agrees with it. Not everyone in our community is going to agree with it, and obviously a lot of people very much, saw it in a certain light. You found it, very like offensive, and I understand it, but how do you think the student or any student in a student run publication could use a political cartoon effectively? How could they do so to show their opinion in a more in a manner that would show their opinion without being offensive, if that's how you found that?
Well, again, don't make assertions that are objectively wrong, such as the one, as I'm sort of looking at it right now, saying, with the elephant representing both the Republicans and Israel, we want to genocide Palestinians. I mean, that is just simply not true. It is objectively not just wrong, but deeply offensive. And that's the line. It's not and if you want to see the opposite, I mean, look up political cartoons in, I presume, Haaretz and the Jerusalem Post lampooning Netanyahu. It's not like there isn't a way of doing this. But again, it's, the assertion that Israel wants to genocide, it's now a verb, the Palestinians, that is anti-Semitic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Professor Al-Marashi, do you have any other take on this?
Well, I mean, this is, a matter, and the conversation is a good rehearsal because there will be a conversation on this subject at San Diego State University on February 14th on Valentine's Day, the Day of Love, where we could we'll talk about this. There is a fine line. I mean, there are cartoons that, where we're talking about the kind of the history of the visual. There are images that have been used as propaganda for the purpose of incitement as well. I mentioned earlier the Muhammad cartoons. Not all those cartoons were equal. Some of the, when I say, Muslims have been insulted before, there were some that were clearly Islamophobic. Others were kind of tongue-in-cheek. So, in the podcast, this is a debate, the debate on where does one draw the line? This is something that, and again, it will be a debate. Everyone will have their opinions, and it's up to you as future communicators and media professionals to decide the ethics going forward. And I think for your case, for your generation, this has been a very good learning experience.
And then to sort of just like wrap everything up here because we're short on time. Is there anything else you guys would like to add to what we've said here today?
Well, I just want to thank you for being, like I said, what was my ultimate complaint when I began this was apathy, lack of empathy, the problem I had, amongst a good generation of students. So, I just thank you for reaching out and being patient and trying to do a podcast on this. At the end of the day, I just want to laud that you two are, and hopefully the people who've taken the time to listen to this, not apathetic. So, just thank you for being engaged.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. And I would just like to add to that, I want to compliment you guys on the intelligence and of the questions that you asked, the clarity with
Mhm.
which you ask them. I mean, I hope you two are both journalists. I hope you guys have a long and excellent career ahead of you. You guys are great. Thank you again for inviting me. And thank
Really
you,
appreciate
Professor Marishi.
And thank you for
My
just
pleasure. Thank you.
thank you for
Take
being so
care.
respectful. And it was really great to
Yeah.
have this conversation and just like really in a really like positive way. I really appreciate it, and we really appreciate it. So thank you.
And once we do produce our podcast, I will reach out to you both and send you guys the link.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Taking off.
Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.